Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We have a lot to cover in the next couple of hours. In this first half hour, we're going to spend some time talking with our friend, Representative Tony Tinderholt. He is a father, a veteran, and a conservative Republican. As a matter of fact, one of the founding members of the Texas Freedom Caucus, individual that represents those in District 94. That would be Arlington, Dalworthington, Gardens, Pantego, to mention just a few areas there. Individual that, of course, served in the military and the Air Force, also has been an educator, a Spanish teacher at Columbia College, and holds a master's degree in educational leadership. But we're going to be talking about some of these very important issues before the Texas legislature. The first article we've posted here is the Abolition of Abortion in Texas Act, HB 896. Tony Tinderholt, always great to have you on the program with us.
Thank you for inviting me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, you know, as lead up to you, one of the things that we talked about just the other day from a piece by David French is which he was actually challenging Republican legislatures around the country to throw down the gauntlet and start passing heartbeat bills, because his argument is that the time for incrementalism is over, something I've heard you say many times before, and maybe it had its day in the past, so we'll acknowledge that. But if you really want the Supreme Court eventually to overrule Roe versus Wade, you really don't give them any justification when you nibble at the margins. And as much as it's been helpful to have a banning of third trimester abortions or establishing a waiting period and those kinds of things, you know, it would be hard for some of the justices to say, well, we really need to overturn Roe versus Wade because, after all, in some of these legislatures, they've required that an abortion doctor have admitting privileges to a local hospital. And you've been at the forefront of saying, let's not nibble at the edges. Let's stop incrementalism. Let's pass a piece of legislation that obviously will be declared unconstitutional by a federal judge, but at least set the stage for the future of Roe versus Wade. Have I done a pretty good job of setting up the piece?
Absolutely, sir. And I'll tell you, I have a lot of people say, you know, why are you authoring a bill that you know is going to be found unconstitutional by the Supreme Court? And my response is pretty simple. We legislate, we make the laws, law enforcement enforce them, and judges uphold them. They don't have the right to legislate from the bench. And so, you know, my bill, when it passes, it gives our Attorney General, this session we changed it, where he may challenge the Supreme Court if he'd like to, but we have states' rights. And when this passes, you know, we can do just like many other states ignore federal law or rulings. You know, we can do this in Texas if this passes. Totally legal.
Well, and again, one of the things I'm noticing, I'd love to get your comments, is it's almost like everything's bifurcating. There was a time when there were people saying, well, maybe we can meet in the middle. I don't see anybody meeting in the middle up in the state of New York right now. You know, I mean, there was a time in which even Bill Clinton talked about making abortion safe, legal, and rare. And he used to even overemphasize the word rare. But now you're having in New York, of course, I can mention Vermont and Rhode Island, even the controversy out of Virginia, those that are thinking maybe it's a possibility that Roe versus Wade would be overturned. They're going to the far extreme on some of these issues. What are your thoughts?
Well, we had that exact same bill authored in the Texas House by Representative Jeff Leach, and it had a hearing this week. What was interesting is the 4 Democrats on that committee skipped to the committee meeting because they don't want to vote on that.
I noticed.
They don't want to vote on that. But I'll tell you, it's unpopular. I think it's pushing Democrats away from the Democrat Party. I get it. I try really hard to understand different points of view. I try to understand where a Democrat might be coming from. We just disagree fundamentally, and we're pushing forward. Now, this is the first time that I've been able to say publicly, I was told we're getting a hearing on this April 8th. So this bill will be heard April 8th in the Texas House.
Well, I was going to ask you that question because we know that it's Jeff Leach there. And I was noticing that Jeff Leach, of course, chairs that committee. I think it was Matt Krause who had trouble getting down there for a while, so they had to postpone that and, of course, had some testimony. But I was wondering because certainly his bill got attention, but I'm glad to hear that yours does as well. And what we've done is posted this PDF. It's 2 pages long, and it explains HB 896, the background following the Constitution. And then you have a whole section on the back here on what we call FEQs, frequently asked questions about the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution and new justices and all sorts of those kinds of things as well. So I really hope people will print it out, pass it out, and recognize that in a little over a week, almost 2 weeks now, I guess, there will be a hearing on the bill. And the point that was made by David French, don't know if you saw that in the National Review, but we talked about it last Friday, is that there is a change in the cultural winds. And if in nothing else, passing bills like this are a statement of moral intent. And we need to move away from what he calls kind of a less death approach of incrementalism and come up with bills that actually protect the unborn. Would you agree?
I do, 100%. And I mentioned a minute ago about other states doing other things. You know, it's not a fair comparison to compare marijuana to abortion, but Colorado, for instance, it's against federal law to have marijuana, possess it, smoke it, but they ignore that federal law. And that's kind of the same premise that we would do in Texas. And, you know, a lot of people misunderstand the bill. They think that we're just outright outlawing abortion, when in actuality, in the murder statute, there's an exception to murder for a pregnant woman and a medical professional to terminate the life of an unborn child. We're just simply removing that exception to murder. And it really streamlines everything, because if a drunk driver kills a pregnant woman, they get manslaughter times 2. If a murderer murders a woman that's pregnant, they get murder 1 or whatever the charge is 2 times. We're just aligning that to where there's no more exceptions in the murder statutes for taking the life of an unborn child.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to chat a little bit more about that, but also get your thoughts about the budget bills and property tax and a variety of other things. But one of those I want to put on the table when we come back from our break is, what about this issue of Planned Parenthood? Because that's another very significant issue in terms of funding. If indeed you did not have Planned Parenthood clinics, there probably would still be some independent abortion clinics, but not very many. And already with some of the regulations, that's the case. But we have seen some of the question about funding, and I'd love to get your thoughts about what is happening there in terms of the revenue and Planned Parenthood and some of the other aspects of that issue as well. Tony Tinderholt with us, and if you are interested, number one, in this particular piece of legislation, it is HB 896. You heard him say that in April, there is going to be a hearing on this, and the hue and cry will be incredible, and we expect that to be the case. So we wanted you to know about that ahead of time, wanted you to be able to read it and find out a little bit more about it, look at not only some of the background and how this could affect the issue of Roe versus Wade. What about the Constitution? What about incrementalism, which we've talked about before here on Point of View, and even has some of those frequently asked questions. And one of those I want to put to him after we come back from the break is the whole issue of Planned Parenthood. Then we'll move on to a couple other issues that he's been following there in the Texas legislature. And we'll continue our conversation with Tony Tinderholt right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The democratically controlled House of Representatives just passed a signature piece of legislation. The bill clearly illustrates what the congressional leaders would like to do in America if they could control both the houses of Congress and the presidency. The editors of National Review call it a legislative buffet of bad ideas. The Institute for Free Speech calls it the For the Politicians Act. And the American Civil Liberties Union wrote a letter to the members of Congress urging them to vote no on the bill. When you have such diverse groups expressing their concern about the bill, you know it has many problems. For example, the bill would expand the requirements for financial disclosure. First, this is of concern as a time when citizens are being harassed and intimidated because they supported a marriage amendment on the ballot. Second, even the ACLU has expressed concern that a person could be exposed as a political donor if an organization chooses, without the donor's knowledge, to mention a politician by name. The bill would also revamp the Federal Elections Commission and virtually assure that it would come under partisan control. The bill strips from the states the ability to draw their own congressional districts, which are much more likely to understand the cultures and different priorities of the regions in their state. Critics also see much of the bill is designed to limit political speech. We have seen the desire of social media outlets and universities to control any speech that is unpopular or contradictory to political correctness. The bill attempts to micromanage speech into government-approved lanes. It is unlikely that a Republican-controlled Senate will approve this legislation, but the bill does show what Democrat leaders would want to implement if Democrats win control of Congress and the White House. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Representative Tony Tinderholt with us for a few more minutes, again representing District 94 in the Texas legislature. And Tony, for just a minute, let's talk about Planned Parenthood, because first of all, there are those that are saying, well, this is going to be kind of a foregone conclusion because we've been able to defund Planned Parenthood. While that is true in some areas of the country, you still have some very important comments about that as well. Can you speak to that?
You know, absolutely. They come to the Texas House and they claim they do mammograms, and women call and ask to be able to have mammograms done, and oftentimes they don't even do those types of women's services. We know what they're in business to do, and it's very clear. And, you know, it's a religious liberty and a personal freedom choice to have or not have your tax dollars used to commit murder of unborn children. And so we've worked really hard in Texas to try to stop the use of tax dollars from being used for abortion, specifically with Planned Parenthood. Last night, wonderful desk mate, who's a Freedom Caucus member as well, Valerie Swanson, did an amendment to the budget that disallowed the 4% of hospitals that accept tax dollars to it stop them from being able to continue doing abortions in Texas. So we're making strides every session that we get together, but we only get together every 2 years in Texas.
Yes. Well, again, just thought I'd bring some of those issues up. Since you did mention the budget, that was another question. You know, as one of the founding members of the Texas Freedom Caucus, I know you wanted to have a much leaner budget and one that really would provide some true property tax relief. But that doesn't look like that's going to happen. But give us some of your perspective on what's been happening there in the Texas House.
So the warm and fuzzy, the good part of the budget last night is that everyone voted for it. All 149 members. The speaker usually abstained. And, you know, it was nice. It was unity, but it's a bloated budget. We're spending a lot of money. We're spending it in some of the right places. We need to help educators. We need to help retired teachers. We had an amazing amendment on the budget from another Freedom Caucus member. It's interesting that it's oftentimes Freedom Caucus members doing this stuff, but Matt Shaheen in the North DFW area, a $2.7 billion tax relief that's going to go to taxpayers. But I think of all of the things with the budget last night, the thing that I would have liked to have seen more than anything is for people to either see their taxes, you know, kind of streamlined or go down. I think people deserve tax relief, but I'm not convinced that we're going to get the level that the Freedom Caucus would like.
What about things like the Rainy Day Fund and protecting the border and all sorts of other issues that are floating around right now? What do you think might be happening in the next couple of months?
So I was at the border last Thursday with my congressman, DPS. We flew down there. We did an entire day with DPS. We wanted to see where our money's being spent. The gunboats, the helicopters. Make no doubt, Texas is filling the gap where the federal government is failing. We're spending over $800 million every 2 years to secure the border, but it's still very porous. You know, I see some bills Monday. I believe there's a bill Monday from Kyle Biederman, a border bill that moves some money to build 17 miles of some sort of barrier in the Laredo area. It adds additional checkpoints. I think we're going to see a lot of attention on the border. There's a lot of really exciting bills coming up in the Texas legislature, and the border is sure to be one of the top priorities.
One of the other things I thought I'd ask you about, and again, it's not in your district, so maybe you don't have a whole lot of thoughts, but we have spent over the last couple of days a little bit of discussion about whether or not Chick-fil-A can be in the San Antonio airport. After you get off, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the suggestions that have been made about even investigating that. But I think it underscores a bigger issue, and that is maybe you're fortunate in places that you represent in Tarrant County where you have a little more freedom, so-called religious freedom, a little more tolerance. But you know as well as I do, living in Austin right now or going to San Antonio, Houston, or even places in Dallas, that any kind of view that isn't considered politically correct is not only not welcome, but sometimes you're even prevented from being able to do business.
You know, I believe in personal property rights. If that airport, and I'm just using the generic example, if the airport's privately owned, I think that private business owners have the choice to determine who comes in and who doesn't as a business owner. You know, but for an airport or any kind of entity that's involved with public-private partnerships to come out and tell a business that they can't be there because they don't believe in their religious stances, I think is totally unethical. I think it's probably even unconstitutional, and it's an abuse of any government agency to be involved in any decision like that.
And again, that's what I would say. I mean, if you're private property, I don't have a right to come to you and your wife and your kid and say you have to do these things in your home because you own that property. And even if I would disagree with some of the things that you do, unless it's criminal or something like that, you have total freedom over that. And of course, we've understood that because we've seen bakers like certainly Jack Phillips in Colorado and others that said, look, I just don't really feel good about baking a cake for a same-sex ceremony. But again, that's someplace where we want to intrude on their private property rights. Then when we have a public facility, because I really kind of see the San Antonio airport as a little bit more public than a private property issue. We have the other direction. But anyway, I just thought I'd get your comments because this whole issue of First Amendment is front and center. And the fact that it's just happening south of where you are located right now just illustrates why we have to sort of pay attention to some of these First Amendment issues, don't we?
I agree. And I think it shows the intolerance of the other side. And when I say the intolerance, I'd like people to try to look at it as your cup half full versus half empty, because the fact that the left is doing this stuff and it's all over the news, people are starting to really see what their ideology is and how they just want to shut Christian conservatives down. And so our cup's half full because the right media outlets, other people are playing it, showing the world what level of intolerance they have. So I think we use this and we capitalize on it, and we do the Christian thing, and we attempt to fix this kind of stuff.
Well, just before we let you go, let's again talk about the fact that we have a link to your website. It's TonyTinderholt.com. And, of course, people don't even have to know how to spell it because we've got a link there, and there are all sorts of issues and things of that nature. But if somebody would like to support what you're doing, get some of this information, which, again, we've put on our website, the Abolition of Abortion in Texas Act, or if they'd like to contact you or even show up for the hearing that takes place in April, talk about how they can utilize some of the material that's already on your website.
Absolutely. We encourage you to go on the website. There's a contact form that goes straight to my email. I'm responsive. It comes to my phone. I respond to those. We'd encourage you to contact me to find out more information about the hearing that's going to be on the 8th. Should be released coming up here this Wednesday, the better details. I tell you, we're really, really excited to have this hearing, and I encourage you to go see a little bit more about who I am and what I stand for on that website and shoot us a contact form.
So, again, let me encourage you to go to the website. It's TonyTinderholt.com, and there is a place where you can get email updates, and you don't have to necessarily be in District 94 to follow this individual who, as I said before, is one of the founding members of the Texas Freedom Caucus. So I think that is certainly the case, one of the most conservative members of the Texas House. So send him a note right now, find out a little bit more, make sure you sign up so you know when that hearing is. And, of course, there were a lot of people that showed up for the hearing on the a particular bill that we just talked about, the Jeff Leach bill, and I hope we get a good turnout for yours as well. And if you find yourself saying, I really like to read this and pass this on to friends, you can go to his website, or of course we've already posted this Abolition of Abortion in Texas Act. It's a 2-page, I'll hold it up here for anybody to see, PDF, and it really does a good job of kind of summarizing this, and I would encourage you to take the time to print it out, maybe even take it and post it on your website if you have a website or a Facebook page or a Twitter post or something like that. We'll see what kind of conversation we have. And, of course, my commentary based upon some of the things we've just been talking about, including David French's article that came out last week in National Review, really arguing against incrementalism. That commentary comes out next Wednesday. So if you haven't signed up to get my daily Viewpoints commentary, you might do that as well so that you can find some of that material as well. Tony Tinderholt, thank you for joining us. Look forward to the next opportunity.
Have a wonderful day. I appreciate it.
Going to take a break. When we come back, I want to give you a few more interesting stories about what has happened with this Chick-fil-A issue. Every day, I think it's going to just sort of fade into the sunset and into the distance. Oh, no. Now they're talking about having the FAA look into this issue in terms of discrimination. And then we do have a few other issues on the table. Speaking of discrimination, what about this Southern Poverty Law Center? Got a lot to cover. We'll do that right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me also point you to our website, pointofview.net. First of all, there are some great resources. One on the abolition of abortion, HB 896. Two other articles I may get to this hour, although I'm thinking I may postpone some of them in light of all the things that are happening on the Chick-fil-A story. But we do have one on the collapse of the Southern Poverty Law Center. I may spend some time on that this hour. And also we have one on the Jesse Smollett case controversy, which is just one of a series of articles now I'm going to be quoting from. So I've just posted one, and maybe later we'll point you to some others as well. But just as a program note, about a half an hour from now, we're going to have Dr. Paul Gould in this program in studio, along with Byron Barlowe. And we're going to be talking about Paul Gould's new book, Cultural Apologetics. And I might also mention he's also co-authored a book with Jamie Dew's been on the program with us before on philosophy, a Christian introduction. So may have to bring him back for that book alone. And one of the reasons I'm bringing Byron on is Byron has been reading the book, really brought our attention to it. And there is not only a book, but a DVD. And Byron's been using this even in one of his classes at Houston Baptist University. So I thought that would be of interest to many of you as well. Okay, let's get back to Chick-fil-A. You heard me ask a question or two just a minute ago from Tony Tinderholt, but this is one I didn't see coming. Guess I should have. First Liberty Institute sent a letter to the United States Secretary of Transportation, Elaine Chao, calling for an investigation of the City Council of San Antonio for religious discrimination after excluding Chick-fil-A from participating in a contract. I'll read parts of the letter in just a minute. But Hiram Sasser, who's been on the program with us before, said federal taxpayers should not be required to subsidize religious bigotry. The city council cannot operate in a way that brazenly violates the Constitution, the federal law. But if it chooses to, then the federal government should pull its grant. And so this is kind of interesting. And so the letter, and I have it here, and if we might see if we could even tomorrow, if that conversation comes up with Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews, we might post it there. It's about 6 pages. It's a pretty detailed letter, but it first of all explains that on March, the city council actually in an agreement with those individuals to actually provide concession space excluded Chick-fil-A. Now, first of all, any individual in any city council has to make a choice about when you have limited spaces, who gets to have a restaurant, who does not get to have a restaurant. Got that, figured that out. But when they openly asserted that this was why they were not going to allow Chick-fil-A because of the, quote, legacy of anti-LGBTQ behavior, that then triggered something even more significant. The article then goes, the letter, I should say, to Elaine Chao goes on and details some of the decision-making there as well. And then the rest of the letter is a very strongly worded letter with lots of legalese, so I won't go into all the details there, but it makes the case, and here is what's in bold. The San Antonio City Council engaged in unconstitutional religious discrimination, making them ineligible for federal grants. And that is, as they said, federal taxpayers should not be required to subsidize religious bigotry. And so if indeed you're going to operate in that particular way, you first of all have violated the whole issue. You've engaged in religious discrimination, and that might make you ineligible for federal grants. So that goes on for about a page or so. Then the next section is the city of San Antonio's council members also violated local and federal policies requiring non-discrimination as well. And that one goes on for a few pages. And so it's a pretty lengthy letter, and it is available at First Liberty. We can post it tomorrow if you'd like to read it in its entirety. I would imagine only those of you that have kind of a legal background would be interested. But it does illustrate a point that I made a while back, and that is a little less than 4 years ago, I wrote a Viewpoints commentary about what was happening in the Denver airport. And that's where the Denver City Council ruled that Chick-fil-A could not come in because in that particular case, the argument is that there had been statements made 2 years before by, it wasn't Truett Cathy, but I think it was Dan Cathy, supporting marriage. You know, the view that even people like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton said, say 10 years ago, that they believed in. But that was enough to get them thrown out. Of course, San Antonio went further and said not only do they have views which we consider to be anti-LGBT, but they also give money to, close your ears if this is going to bother you, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I was in an elevator the other day with somebody with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I said, so I guess you're a hate group like we are, And then the other one was Salvation Army. Now, I'll tell you, when you are going to not be allowed to have a restaurant in an airport because you support the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, primarily because you want to actually build in young men and women good, positive values. When that's something that can disqualify you from being in an airport, we do have a problem. And then the Salvation Army, where did that one come from? So it is pretty intriguing. And as I pointed out, Denver had to back down pretty fast, if for no other reason than the Denver attorneys, who are pretty liberal, probably weren't all that supportive of Chick-fil-A, had to come to the city council and say, wait a minute, guys, you do not understand this. There will be, sooner or later, a First Amendment lawsuit, and we will lose it. And this letter that now went from First Liberty Institute to the Secretary of Transportation, Elaine Chao, who, by the way, is married to the Speaker of the Majority Leader in the Senate. So I thought I'd just mention that one as well. Is kind of intriguing to me as well, because that is kind of step one. And if something isn't resolved, I got a feeling step two begins to be one of those First Amendment lawsuits. But we'll see. In the meantime, what's happened in the Texas legislature? Well, you have what is called the Free to Believe Act. That is HB 1035. Bill Zedler is the author of that, and that would bar government from punishing individuals that have deeply held religious beliefs. This would be religious groups, businesses, counselors, medical providers, wedding vendors, or state employees. And so it would prevent individuals in Texas from enduring what Jack Phillips had to endure in the state of Colorado. So that's just a little bit of an update on an issue that I was kind of going to set aside until this letter was sent to the Secretary of Transportation, maybe even having the FAA investigate. So we'll see where it goes, and we'll keep you updated on that as well. Just before we take a break, it's been kind of interesting to see some things behind the scenes. One is that you had a vote just the other day in the Senate on the Green New Deal. Nobody voted for it. All the Republicans voted against it, and most of the Democrats just voted present. And so obviously it didn't go anywhere. But it's been kind of intriguing to see what's been going on behind the scenes. And this comes from somebody who was behind the scenes. And so you have to take it with a grain of salt, because they are trying to write down quickly what the former President Barack Obama said. But what happened is that the other day, the former President Barack Obama actually met with a group of freshman House Democrats. This is AOC and all these individuals, and actually warned them about the cost associated with some of these liberal ideas that were popular with some of these freshman House Democrats, and really encouraged the members to look at the price tags. The quote, as best as the individual who was there could remember it, was, he said, "We as Democrats shouldn't be afraid of big, bold ideas, but also we need to think in the nitty-gritty about how those big, bold ideas will work and how you pay for them." And so I thought it was kind of interesting, as somebody said, when Barack Obama is warning about spending too much, maybe it's time to sit down and take notice. One other thing, again, behind the scenes, is the Pentagon budget right now has done some reprogramming, and because of that, they've been able to come up with, isn't this amazing, $1 billion that will go to 59 miles of fencing, improving roads, and other measures in the southern border. The Department of Defense has authorized the Army Corps of Engineers to begin planning and construction of the project. The department will direct the funds towards an 18-foot-high fencing along Yuma and the El Paso sections of the border, and that's according to a letter of the acting Secretary, Patrick Shanahan, which was sent to the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen. So you will, of course, hear nothing about that in the mainstream media because they don't agree with that. I suspect sooner or later, probably sooner rather than later, there'll be some kind of attempt to go to a federal judge to prevent that. But nevertheless, I thought I'd just tell a few of you that are listening right now some of the behind the scenes. Barack Obama warning some of the freshman Democrats in the House, you better start looking at some price tags. And number two, something else that you probably haven't heard anywhere except here, is that it looks like $1 billion has been scraped up in the Defense Department, given to the Army Corps of Engineers to build that fence that the president was promising. Let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover, and I'll do so right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. I might just mention again as a program note that we will have in studio with us next hour Dr. Paul Gould. His book is entitled Cultural Apologetics, and maybe in the future we'll get him on also, as he has co-authored a book with Jamie Dew, who's been on the program with us before, Philosophy, A Christian Introduction. And so that'll be him, and of course Byron Barlowe will be with us as well, so we'll spend some time talking about that. And you will find information about that book. It's the third article on our website here. And just for a minute, since we've been spending some time talking about everything from Chick-fil-A to everything else, I thought we would revisit the issue of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and we may come back to this more tomorrow on our Friday weekend edition. But there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, if you have not seen this incredible flurry of articles that have come out ever since, of course, the attempt to clean up the organization by sending Morris Dees and others packing, you would certainly find that one of the articles I've posted here is by our friend David French. The Southern Poverty Law Center is in a state of moral collapse. But also Tim Wildman at American Family Association, and I'll come back to this a little bit later, pointed me to another article in Current Affairs. This is written by a very liberal individual, and it's entitled Southern Poverty Law Center is Everything That's Wrong with Liberalism. And just the high points, because, by the way, this thing, if you haven't seen it, make sure you have enough paper in your printer, because it goes on for pages and pages. But I love what he says here: deploring bigotry while engaging in it, and that's certainly the case, caring about equality except in the workplace, being obscenely rich in a time of need, very critical of their fundraising, focusing on the wrong thing. And he talks about these hate groups are not expanding, but anything but. And this, I think, leads to one of the quotes from this article that is used by David French. So let me just get the David French piece in here, since I only have a few minutes. But one of the things that David French says, and again, he's been in the studio with us and writes oftentimes for National Review, is he says, the longer you live, the more you see that a lack of integrity often has a viral effect on an organization. Once the compromises begin, they can't necessarily be stopped. And he says, so it is with the Southern Poverty Law Center, one of the progressive America's most influential and storied civil rights organizations. And he says this isn't news to conservatives, as we all have talked about before on this program. So many different organizations over the years have been tagged with that hate group designation, and they do have some profound impact. For example, you have, let's just pick a couple here, Christian organizations like the Alliance Defending Freedom. Now, here's an organization that just won 2 cases before the Supreme Court. To list them as a hate group is ridiculous. To label a scholar like Charles Murray of the American Enterprise Institute as an extremist is, again, ridiculous. But there are very dire consequences, and David French reminds us, for example, that sometimes people have used the Southern Poverty Law Center designations to justify murder. He says, remember the man who tried to commit mass murder at the Family Research Council? He found his target through the Southern Poverty Law Center list of alleged anti-gay groups. He says, remember when an angry mob attacked Charles Murray, who I just mentioned a minute ago, at Middlebury College and injured a professor because of the Southern Poverty Law Center? Those protesters were attacking what they thought was a white nationalist, which is, of course, not true. And then sometimes you had, as he points out here, some individuals that were tagged that had the tag removed. Probably the best example is that they tagged Ben Carson for a while with that hate group label. Didn't really last, and as a result, they were forced to apologize. But in the midst of all of this now, you have on March 14th, the Southern Poverty Law Center fired its co-founder and trial lawyer Morris Dees. Within hours, the Los Angeles Times wrote that the Southern Poverty Law Center had been wrestling with complaints of workplace mistreatment of women and people of color. And that gets back to some of the statements that were made even in this article by a liberal who was saying that the Southern Poverty Law Center doesn't actually look like a liberal organization. It, in many cases, violates so much of it. And if you've read some of these articles, you've had people that have said, when I joined the organization and I started to see all the problems in the organization, they'd say, well, just welcome to the Southern Poverty Law Center. or the Poverty Palace, as some of them called it. And so on March 19th, the Southern Poverty Law Center announced that it was hiring an outside lawyer to review its workplace environment and policies. Then 3 days later, Richard Cohen, the president of the Southern Poverty Law Center, stepped down. And then, of course, you have the New York Times published in almost a 2,000-word report on the Southern Poverty Law Center's intolerance within. And we could post that one too, but again, the link is already in that second article we've posted on the website. But again, let me quote from the New York Times just to give you a sense of it. Current and former employees said Mr. D's dismissal was only part of the turbulence rattling a social justice organization afflicted by morale issues, staff turnover, and a sense that the center has not embraced the values it champions across the country. But I love what David French says. Oh, I disagree. Given the intolerance and bad faith it exhibited in its evaluations and assessments of all too many conservatives and Christians, I'd argue that the Southern Poverty Law Center has embraced exactly the values it champions. It's intolerant through and through. But just as we wind down, one of the most extensive quotes in the David French article, it wasn't until Tim Wildman sent me this article I realized where it came from, and that is this. The whole issue of how, in many cases, it manufactures hate groups. Not just the Christian groups that have been linked, but here I'll just read this piece and you get the idea. This particular author said, when you look at the hate map, you find something interesting. Many of these groups barely seem to exist at all. The Holocaust denial group in Kerrville, Texas, called CarolynYeager.net, appears to just be a woman called Carolyn Yeager. That's all it is. A male supremacy group called Return of Kings is apparently just a blog published by a pickup artist and a couple of his friends. And the most recent post is an announcement from 6 months ago that the project was on indefinite hiatus. Then you have Tony Alamo, the abusive cult leader, and that's listed. Tony Alamo's Christian Ministries. He died in prison in 2017. A black nationalist group in Atlanta called, I can't even pronounce the words, appears to be an African fashion boutique. Shark Hunters International is one guy who really likes U-boats and takes small groups of sad Nazis on tours to see ruins and relics. And good luck finding out how much the Samantha Roy Institute of Science and Technology, which is, if it currently is operated at all, is a tiny anti-Catholic cult based in Wisconsin. And the point he's making is, and this again is a direct quote from this particular article that appeared in Current Affairs, is, first of all, it just manufactured hate groups because there just aren't that many hating people in the world. And so it, in order to seem justified, picked out any group and called it a hate group. And then worked, maybe even by just looking through web pages and things like that, tried to find some others so that they could continue to do the fundraising. And, of course, that has been the biggest issue, the amount of money that has been collected, much of it in offshore accounts. And a good reason why, sadly, even though the Dallas Morning News still quoted without any kind of attribution the Southern Poverty Law Center, why any mainstream press should ignore what is happening in the Southern Poverty Law Center other than to document what might eventually be its demise. Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to spend some time talking about this issue of cultural apologetics, renewing the Christian voice, conscience, and imagination in a disenchanted world. I think it's going to be a fascinating conversation, and we are privileged to have in studio with us Dr. Paul Gould and Byron Barlowe, and so I hope that you will join us. And then if you have some comments or questions, feel free to give us a call. In the meantime, we've posted some very good articles on the website, pointofview.net. Check those out, and we'll be back right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You know, so often here on Point of View, we talk about how it's really important for you to know how to articulate a biblical worldview and also how to defend a biblical worldview. And that idea of defending a biblical worldview is known as apologetics. But there's another aspect to apologetics. Apologetics, when I say the word, sometimes sounds like kind of a left hemisphere, linear, logical kind of presentation. And over the years, we've had so many individuals that do apologetics that fit into that category. But there's another kind, and that's why I wanted to really spend some time today talking about this new book called Cultural Apologetics. And it is entitled Renewing the Christian Voice, Conscience, and Imagination in a Disenchanted World. It is published by Zondervan. Might just mention that in addition to the book, there's also a DVD that goes with it, which is outstanding as well, that I would highly recommend, and would be something that if you are a small group leader, a teacher, Sunday school class leader, maybe even a pastor, that you might want to actually address. And the author of that book is in studio with us today, Dr. Paul Gould, who has his PhD from Purdue University, president and founder of the Two Task Institute. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute. We have a link to his website, and an individual that teaches philosophy and apologetics at the College of Graduate and Professional Studies at Oklahoma Baptist University. And Paul, it's just great to have you in studio with us.
Thanks, Kerby. It's great to be here.
Bringing into this conversation also is our good friend Byron Barlowe, who's been on the program with us many times before, research associate, digital communicator with Probe Ministries, and an individual, as I mentioned last hour when I was promoting this, that found this book so helpful because, as I think some people know, since you've been on the program before, you've been taking classes at Houston Baptist University, and you found this book to be extremely helpful, didn't you?
Absolutely. In fact, it kind of entails a lot of the program, and it really needs to get out beyond those walls, or at least the online program. So it's a fantastic resource. I'd love to talk more about it.
And that's what we're going to do. We may get back into the issues in the news the next hour, but I just thought this would be just a great opportunity to focus on some of the topics we've addressed. I might also mention, maybe, Paul, we'll get you back in the future because Dr. James Dew has been on this program with us before, and you and he have a book called Philosophy, A Christian Introduction. So this will probably be a new opportunity for us. But when we talk about cultural apologetics, both in the book and especially in your video, you take us back to Acts 17, Mars Hill. Give us a little more understanding of what's going on here.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting when you look at the book of Acts, there's two times in the whole book where Paul addresses a non-Jewish audience. So someone that has a different culture than he comes from. The first one is in Acts 15, where he addresses the God-fearing Greeks. And then also there's Acts 17, where he addresses the Greeks on Mars Hill. And so as I was unpacking Acts chapter 17, I realized, and actually the whole book is sort of inspired by the model he gives there, where he basically identifies his starting point. He looks around and he sees all these idols to an unknown God. And he basically says, let me tell you the true nature of this idol who you worship that you don't know. And then as you read the address that he gives there in the Areopagus, which is this hill and this ruling body in Athens, he basically builds a bridge to Jesus and the gospel, and he does it brilliantly, where he's quoting their poets and he's quoting their philosophers, and he's responding to objections, and he basically brings them to what is really the ultimate question. What do you make of Jesus Christ? And right. That's really what we want to do is take that example, understand our Athens, and then, like Paul, build a bridge to Jesus and the gospel. so that we can have everybody ask in a meaningful way, what do you make of Jesus Christ?
One of the things, Byron, I know you and I like about this book, and I'll hold this up for people watching right now, is there's some great diagrams. And I love this diagram for those that are watching online, because on the one hand, you have our Athens, because in some respects, our 21st century world is in many ways very much like that first century world. And as a result, you talk about some of the starting points and some of the barriers, disenchanted, as hedonistic and some of those, and then how that bridges to the gospel. So talk to that, because in some respects, I've said this before, maybe you agree or disagree, you're free to disagree, but I've said that in some respects, our 21st century world is more like the first century than any century that followed it. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, that would be interesting to unpack that a little, because in some ways, the ancients' experience of the world is much different than the modern experience of the world. And so in this sense, it is very different, because for the ancients, they never knew if they're going to come face to face to a God or something like that. And so the universe was charged with divinity. Divine judgment was always, maybe around the corner. But the modern experience of the world, and the word that we use, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about it, is disenchanted.
Disenchanted.
And the idea there is that the modern experience of the world is vastly different. We no longer think that, and rightly so, that there's a nymph behind every tree or things like that. But the world has been emptied of all her magic. And so, we conceive of even space itself as empty. And, the planet Earth existing on this little spiral of an insignificant galaxy in the middle of a vast universe of 100 billion galaxies. And so, the idea is that there's no deep beauty, there's no deep magic, to use the proper word, that the world isn't sacred. And so in that sense, we are very different. But you're right in the sense that there's a very eclectic view that you found in Athens, where there's all these different views that are competing for, the mantle of
Pluralism,
truth. And that, in that sense, absolutely very similar.
And that gets into this whole idea, Byron, of their interest, young people are oftentimes love C.S. Lewis. They love Tolkien.
Right.
Or even now, look at the most popular films. They're all about superheroes. There's a sense in which the secular humanistic idea has just erased anything that's magical, anything that's supernatural. And so that longing, I think, maybe explains some of that.
Absolutely. And Paul does a good job of writing to that, teaching it in the university, too. When young people are convinced that God actually exists, they are able, as you told in a story, to actually shrug and move on. Why? Because it's devoid of meaning. And so the so what factor just doesn't get through a lot of times. But I think they're searching for that because they are human and they have these God-given longings. They're searching for the hero. They're searching for something bigger than themselves. So when a world is mundane and flat and monotone, you go looking elsewhere. So it's actually a good sign that they're actually all over superhero movies, and maybe we can nudge them towards the real superhero, Jesus Christ.
Well, we need to take a break. When we come back, though, Paul, I want to spend some time talking about disenchantment, which is your second chapter. And again, you have whole sessions in your DVD about disenchantment. You sort of already alluded to that. And then re-enchantment. And then we'll get into imagination and some of this. But if nothing else, one of the things I think, Byron, that this book helps is to recognize that there's a place for the arts. There's a place for culture. And in some respects, it is something that is missing. And it's something that sort of bypasses the head and hits the heart, don't you think?
Yes. In fact, in the book, he mentions looking at the beam and along the beam. What's the beam? The beam of light, the beam of conscience and beauty and imagination. So we need to enter in the way we do when we watch movies. And so that's the kind of thing that we need to address, and we can through a book like that.
Well, again, the book is entitled Cultural Apologetics. It is published by Zondervan. We have a link to Paul Gould's website, but we also have a link there in case you'd like to get it in paperback or in Kindle. I highly recommend the 15 different lessons in the DVD, so that those of you that are in positions of authority or leadership or teaching, this is something that you can use and maybe play one of the DVD clips by Paul and then have a discussion. So again, we think this is just a great resource. So we're going to take a break, come back and talk about this idea of disenchantment and then re-enchantment. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The democratically controlled House of Representatives just passed a signature piece of legislation. The bill clearly illustrates what the congressional leaders would like to do in America if they could control both the houses of Congress and the presidency. The editors of National Review call it a legislative buffet of bad ideas. The Institute for Free Speech calls it the For the Politicians Act. And the American Civil Liberties Union wrote a letter to the members of Congress urging them to vote no on the bill. When you have such diverse groups expressing their concern about the bill, you know it has many problems. For example, the bill would expand the requirements for financial disclosure. First, this is of concern as a time when citizens are being harassed and intimidated because they supported a marriage amendment on the ballot. Second, even the ACLU has expressed concern that a person could be exposed as a political donor if an organization chooses, without the donor's knowledge, to mention a politician by name. The bill would also revamp the Federal Elections Commission and virtually assure that it would come under partisan control. The bill strips from the states the ability to draw their own congressional districts, which are much more likely to understand the cultures and different priorities of the regions in their state. Critics also see much of the bill is designed to limit political speech. We have seen the desire of social media outlets and universities to control any speech that is unpopular or contradictory to political correctness. The bill attempts to micromanage speech into government-approved lanes. It is unlikely that a Republican-controlled Senate will approve this legislation, but the bill does show what Democrat leaders would want to implement if Democrats win control of Congress and the White House. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today as we talk about cultural apologetics. That is the title of the book by Dr. Paul Gould and Byron Barlowe. Well, Paul, let me come to you if we can. Disenchantment. You've already sort of mentioned that, and you got to love somebody who starts a chapter where he's quoting from John Cougar Mellencamp and some of this, as well as then re-enchantment. So take us through this idea of disenchantment. What you mean there?
Yeah. Okay, good. So one of the key ideas or the big ideas of the book is just, well, first of all, we've got to understand our culture. If we're ever going to have the gospel, have meaningful conversations with people about the gospel so that they can understand it, we've got to understand where people are coming from. And so disenchantment answers the question, what is the dominant way of perceiving in our culture? And so in a word, it's disenchantment. And what I mean by that is that we no longer have eyes to see the world in its proper light. So, for example, we use words like everyday or mundane or ordinary, but that's actually not the way the world is. I mean, the proper words to describe the world would be things like deeply beautiful or mysterious or gift or sacred or holy. And so because we no longer see the world in its proper light, that actually changes everything. And so one of the big ideas is that disenchantment not only has made unbelief possible, of course, we have lots of vocal atheists in our world, but it actually makes belief more difficult too.
Yes.
The doubts, one of the characteristics I talk about is the felt absence of God. And that's something that it doesn't just affect those out there, it affects our experience of the church as well. Yeah. And so, so the idea here is that we live in a disenchanted world. And so part of chapter 2 there is kind of descriptive. How did we arrive there? And then chapter 3, this idea of re-enchantment is more prescriptive and actually more hopeful. And let me just back up just to give you what I found in doing the research. And actually, I'll just say that C.S. Lewis unlocked this for me in a not well-known book, or actually essay called Talking About Bicycles. And it's this essay where he's using the bicycle as an example for pretty much everything. And he says that we go through these 4 stages with respect to pretty much everything. So here they are real quick, and this will help understand the reenchantment part. So he says, you come in as a child and the adult gadgets mean nothing to you. So you're unenchanted. That's the first stage. And then he says, imagine that moment, and I'm thinking about in my own life or my kids' life when the training wheels come off. You can kind of think about this, and all of a sudden there's freedom and there's joy. And riding that bike is, this is how the world is supposed to be. And that would be the enchanted stage, the second stage. But then, as anyone knows who has kids or just their own experiences, we quickly go to that third stage, which is disenchanted, where with respect to the bike, it just becomes drudgery. It becomes, work. No one wants to ride it. And Lewis says that most of us tend to stay in that third stage with pretty much respect to everything, but that we've got to press on to the fourth stage, which is reenchantment. And the idea there with respect to the bike is that we would learn to enjoy it in creaturely response as gift. And so what's interesting, though, those stages, as you look at even the storyline of Scripture, you see this pattern of wander from God and then return to God. And the ancients thought of reality actually structured like a story of just that, wander and return to God. And so the prescriptive part is more hopeful, but it's actually grounded in the meta-narrative or the overarching story of the Bible that, even as a culture, we can return. So real quick, then, the idea is that we would return to reality, or this is what I mean by that, is that we would begin to see and delight in the world the same way Jesus does, and then we would invite others to see and delight in the world the same way Jesus does too. And if we do that, then the gospel will begin to make sense, become more plausible, more desirable, and all those things that we care about.
And it seems to me that right now I'm running into more and more people that because we suppress the truth in unrighteousness, as you talk about in your circle there, and empty the world of any kind of meaning, they're looking for something. They may not say that I can find it in the church or in the Bible, but they're looking for something because they wander this planet looking for more. We've got a dog at home, and before we had cats at home, and you can feed dogs or cats, and I don't know what dog contentment looks like, but the dogs look pretty content. You can meet the physical needs of human beings, and they wander this planet looking for more, as if they were meant for something more than this world. And that seems to me that when you reawaken some of those desires, the gospel has a meaning for the first time. That's true?
Right. Yeah, and this is what's so interesting, and the reason why I chose as our starting point to having this conversation are these universal longings that every human has for goodness, truth, and beauty. Because, the intelligentsia, they tell us, hey, there is no God, the world is mundane, there's nothing beyond or transcendent in the world and things like that. But if you look at the kinds of stories that we're drawn to and the kind of TV shows that we watch, I mean, Byron mentioned superhero. You guys are talking about superhero movies. We're fascinated with superheroes. We're fascinated with extra mundane things. And if we think about it this way, like that, those longings are deep longings of the human heart, and they actually betray, I think, this modern story, what the intelligentsia are telling us. And so our job as cultural apologists then is just to focus on that for a little bit. What is it about these stories? And then sort of help them along the way to this deep desire of the heart, which is ultimately our longing for God.
Interesting. Now, you just used a term that you define throughout the book, and it's something that I'm quite interested in, but I'm thinking that people would disqualify themselves from the cultural apologist. So what is a cultural apologist? And I want to pick up on the whole reenchantment in the wild, too.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So what is cultural apologetics? That's actually probably a really good question, since the book title is that. So here's how I've come about that. So about 5 years ago, I was teaching at a seminary locally, and one of the classes I was assigned to was a class called Cultural Apologetics. And so I did what every educator does. I Googled that phrase, and there was nothing out there, and so I basically assigned 7 books that I was interested in that had to do with culture or the gospel or apologetics. And apologetics, traditionally, maybe you've heard that term, is just the idea of giving a defense or a rational defense of our faith. So anyway, I did, taught 7 books, taught the class again, shuffled out those 7 books and read another 7 books. And after doing this about 5 or 6 times, I finally kind of arrived at the definition of what cultural apologetics is. And so here it is. The definition that I'm unpacking is basically this, that we would work to renew the Christian voice, the Christian conscience, and the Christian imagination so that the gospel would be viewed as both true to the way the world is, right? We care about truth deeply, but it would also be true to the way the world ought to be. In other words, that the gospel is not just true, and of course that's a great value in itself.
Factually.
But, absolutely, that it corresponds to the way the world is, but it's also good and beautiful besides. And of course, we've got to, so it satisfies the deep longings of the heart too, and that's part of the good news that we want to help people see with cultural apologetics.
Thank you. We're not just trying to make sense of it all until we get there. Is part of what you're saying, it sounds like. Now, you have a very interesting section in your book in the re-enchantment chapter, and you make the statement, the path of return to God lies through creation itself. You say we can't return to this God-infused reality or transcendence by denying or devaluing the material world. So you don't deal deeply, but you do mention the dualism of, body bad, spirit good, and earth bad, heaven good. And we have been affected by that. But you also say talk about the creation is haunted. Now that sounds kind of, for some, new agey or kind of scary or mystical. And where's the scientific exactitude or truth there? But it sounds like something that even anyone who's been on vacation and looked out the window at a national park would understand, wow, there is something here way beyond me. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so the way that I think of this is that, daily there's a million signs pointing to God for those who have eyes to see. And of course, think of Romans 1:20 and where it talks about how through that which he has made, God has revealed his power and his nature. Yeah. And so I do think one of the most powerful natural signs, we might even call it a theistic natural sign, that shows, that God exists would be the world around us. And because we live in this culture that basically mediates so much of our lives through the pixels of our, smartphones or things like that, we're removing ourselves from reality, and therefore we're not seeing it correctly. In fact, I was telling you, Byron, earlier that I was just speaking at a conference down in South Texas, beautiful hill country, and during one of the days, the students went on a hike, and one of the hikes was to this vista at the top of this little mountain where you could see for miles in every direction. And someone was asking her earlier, what did you think of the hike? And she's like, oh, it was awesome. And, they're like, well, how come? And she said, because I had 3 bars on my cell phone. 3 bars. And it's like she missed the beauty right behind her. And so part of what we need to do is we need to shock people with reality, so that we can, again, see and delight in it the same way Jesus does, because this is a God-infused and a God-bathed world. And so everywhere we turn, God is pointing to us.
Again, the scriptures talk about the heavens declare the glory of God. Right. And Romans 1 says they're without excuse. So I found oftentimes that things happen at Christian camps because when you put God's revelation in the scriptures with God's revelation in creation, that comes together. A lot of that's in chapter 3, or page 83 we're looking at right now, but we need to come back and continue our conversation. Dr. Paul Gould with us, and we also, when we come back, want to talk about his website. It's paul-gould.com, but you don't even have to remember all that. You don't even have to know how to spell it. It's right there. We want to talk about some of those resources, but again, I think you're going to enjoy the book. And don't forget, there's a DVD that goes with it. This could be a great thing to teach in your own small group or Sunday school class. We'll be right back.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continuing our conversation today as we talk about cultural apologetics. Dr. Paul Gould with us and Byron Barlowe. By the way, the book has a foreword by J.P. Moreland's been on the program with us, and Brent Kunkel's been on with us. Sean McDowell endorses it. Corey Miller, to mention just a few. It's a kind of a long list of individuals that have appreciated this book. And if nothing else, we talk about this idea of cultural apologetics, but this is an opportunity to really dig into it a little bit more. And in addition to the book is also, of course, Zondervan has been very nice to put that DVD set together. But let's for just a minute, Paul, talk about what's on your website, paul-gould.com, because there people can find out about books that you've read, other books you recommend, as well as if they'd want to have you come and speak on this issue and those kinds of things. What's available when they land on your website?
Yeah, so there it's just, the online house, I guess. Haven't been blogging lately because a lot of books have been keeping me busy, but blogging, there's a resource for books and more technical articles. I am a philosopher by trade, and so there's a lot of my technical work you can find there. And of course you can contact me there if you'd like me to come out and share with you on any of these topics that we talk about. So,
and again, I can see an opportunity where somebody might have you give the opening talk, and then with these DVDs, each week they could go through some of this. And, again, this is an opportunity to maybe attract some people who aren't so logical, linear. Artists, musicians, people that are very creative that will benefit from some of this idea of imagination and enchantment and some of the things you talk about in the book, don't you think?
Yeah. So let me give you a little structure of the book because it'll help show how this is holistic. A philosopher, his name is Peter Kraft, but he talked about how God has given us 3 prophets of the human soul, and those prophets are our longing for goodness, truth, and beauty. And then he's given us guides on the journey toward those 3 things that we long for. So, for example, reason is on this quest for truth, and our conscience is on a quest for goodness. And then the imagination is on a quest for beauty. And then again, as we put our theology caps on and ask that question, well, what is the source of goodness, truth, and beauty? The answer would be Christ. And so what we're doing is basically we're awakening these deep-seated longings and then putting people on a journey through either the plank of reason, actually all of these, the plank of reason, the plank of the human conscience, and the plank of the imagination so that they can find the source of all this. I love how Augustine, who's an ancient thinker, he wrote a book called The Confessions, where he says in book 3 about God, he says, you are the beauty of all beautiful things. And then he says, you are the good of all good things. And I would just add the truth in which all true things point. And so that's really what we're doing, in this. And so, yeah, of course, we're going to do traditional apologetics. We're going to give arguments. But probably one of the most underutilized is the one that you just brought up, is the idea of our imagination. And beauty and art. Yes. Especially as Christians, we're people of the book, but we live in this age of image. And so this is the aesthetic currency of our age. But we own that, right? As Christians, we serve a creator God who has cultivated through that which he has made goodness, truth, and beauty. And so we should be the ones telling the best stories and singing the best songs and helping evoke this longing for the transcendent through that which we make. And so that's part of a big theme of the book, is that God wants to use our imagination and our longing for beauty actually as part of, preparing the way for the gospel.
And again, it sounds like some of the conversations we've had with people that have been here talking about classical Christian education, because again, goodness, truth, and beauty are very important elements of that. And again, maybe someone wants you to come and maybe even do a teacher seminar, some of those kinds of things as well. And while we're talking about this, Byron, we might just mention the connection Paul has with something else, and that is this whole idea of beauty in the astronomical areas, because we certainly see the heavens declare the glory of God.
Absolutely. He mentioned the idea that outer space is actually a vacuum. Well, that's a modern piece of worldview there. And we decided to address that. And Paul was a seminal part of that. And we did an event that we talked about in the studio about 1 year ago.
Yes.
And it became quite an event because it integrated what we're talking about regarding the imagination and reason. There was a bit of conscience in there, but it took those two things that we're so used to looking at science. And so we had a Hubble photographer, scientist, in the same place where we had someone talking about the worldview behind the heavens and the earth that Lewis wrote about in his famous Narnia Chronicles. So it was Hubble meets Narnia.
Yes.
Well, now that's become a book. And a website. And so Paul is, again, editing a book, co-editing a book that is about the integration of these two things. So we live in a time when science is really the only real way to know stuff. But, au contraire. We have other ways of accessing truth, and sometimes through beauty and intuition and creativity. So those two things coming together in this book is another book you would want to promote.
Yes. Well, we're going to probably talk about that with you as well.
Yeah. It's called The Story of the Cosmos.
Yes. So we're looking forward to that. Well, let's get into this because this whole section in the back here talks about everything from imagination, reason, and conscience. And that's kind of important because obviously imagination is something that we need to work harder at in the Christian world, don't you think?
I do. Yes. I mean, in some ways, so part of the language that I use in the book is that we've got to work to rebaptize our imagination. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to earlier, this idea that the dominant way of perceiving is this disenchanted way of perceiving, and that's something that infects all of us as Christians too. And so, again, to switch, this language largely comes from C.S. Lewis, where when he was a young teen, at 16 years old, he read a fairy story by George MacDonald called Fantastes. Yeah. And in there, he says, now, not as a believer in Christ, but he says that somehow in reading that fairy story, that my imagination was baptized. And he just said that it took his mind, his rational faculties, a little longer to kind of, follow suit. And so he was always told that, again, the intelligentsia would tell him that there is no God and that, we're rational beings merely or only. But then the things that he was most drawn to were the things that evoked beauty and this deep-seated longing for home. And so it was only, 10 or 13 years later when he became a Christian that he realized that Christianity is this perfect blending of reason and romance. And so he says, in the gospel story, I find that it's true myth, that it's a true story, and it blends the two hemispheres of his mind together. And that's one of the cool things about Christianity is that God is not, he wants us to be thinkers, and in fact, he calls us to love him with our mind.
Yeah.
But he also wants us to love him with all of our being, and he's created us. We're not just rational animals. Of course, we are rational animals, and truth matters. But We're not merely rational animals. We're desiring animals. We're imaginative animals. We're moral animals. All of these things, and Christianity satisfies all of that, and that's part of the good news, I think, of the gospel.
Will you talk about some of the downfalls in the pitfalls that we can have? One of the things that I think that lots of listeners need to be challenged in, and may not know it, is just speak to what happens when we overemphasize the rational at the expense of the imaginative. What are we missing as Christians, both in our own spiritual formation, our growth, and also in our witness?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to talk about overemphasizing the mind in a culture that's largely anti-intellectual. But I think you have a good question.
And don't ever want to turn your mind off.
That's right.
No one's arguing for that.
Yeah, but you're right. So we are whole people, right? We are people that we have rational faculties, of course, but we've got so much more as part of who we are. And so we want to be whole people. We don't want to be one-sided. God has created us to run on, you had mentioned classical education, and, the classics believe that our souls were created to be nourished on the good, the true, and the beautiful. That's how we flourish. And so the classical view of happiness, the rich sense of that word, was that we flourish in light of our nature. And that means intellectual and moral virtue. And so, yeah, so if we neglect certain aspects of how God has made us, we're just not going to flourish. Therefore, we're not going to be happy. We're not going to, successfully journey on that quest toward God, which is actually the journey that we're all on, if we faithfully follow it.
Let's take a break because we do have one of those mandatory breaks. And while we're doing that, this would be a great time for you to visit that website, which again is Paul Gould, has some great information there. And I've already given you a couple of suggestions on how you might be able to use this in your Sunday school class, or for those of you that have a Christian school, especially a classical Christian school, and you're talking about things like the good, the true, and the beautiful. That is going to be something that is going to be a great benefit of this book on cultural apologetics. And when we come back, let's, if we can, talk about some of the other aspects, because people might say, okay, now I got the imagination part. Where does reason fit into all of that, and conscience? And again, there are just so many things that are in this book, 220 pages. I would encourage you to get a copy of the book, get the DVD as well. And we have an opportunity for you to order it both in paperback and in Kindle. And so you could get it and start reading it right away. And if you'd like to contact Paul Gould, we have that link there as well. So let's take a break. We'll come back and get into the very last issues of the book today. There are so many that we won't be able to get to, but lots of great arguments for desire and for reason and for morality and others. But also we'll come back and talk a little bit about this idea of reason and conscience and how that fits in together when we talk about disenchanted worlds. And we'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just suggest a couple other places to find information. Of course, we've been talking about the Paul Gould website. Another one I want to emphasize is the Two Tasks Institute. It's twotaskinstitute.org. Very easy to find. But Paul, when people go there, or if they go to YouTube and other places, they can find some of this material. So even before they get the book in the mail, there are some places where they can go to start finding some of this information, can't they?
Yeah, that's right. We've got a podcast. It's called the Udo Podcast, and you can find that at all the normal places that people get access to that. Where the first season we actually already released was we called it a primer, an introduction to this topic of cultural apologetics.
Right. And that's spelled EUDO.
EUDO. There's a longer story. You can find out how we got that name on the first episode of season 1. This season we're actually talking through the virtues and their vices in a disenchanted world. And then season 3, which will be released in the fall, will be on beauty, art, and the imagination in apologetics. So yeah, so resources, video, content. There's going to be a study. There's a study guide that will be put up there soon for the book and a few other things as well.
You know, Byron, we were talking about how schools can benefit, but I think any parent, especially if you've got a young person that right now is going off to youth group and maybe disenchanted with the youth group because it's a lot of pizza and a lot of fun, but they want some more. Or maybe you have individuals in your church that are saying, what's for me? This is all kind of rational, intellectual, which is great. I appreciate that. And really, I want to study God's word, but I'm in the arts. And where's there a place for me? Talk about that.
Right. You know, that's a discussion that's happening in the body of Christ now. It needed to happen a long time ago, but I'm glad it's happening. Is infusion of arts back into the church? Because other branches of the church have long done that, and we admire them in galleries or when we visit Rome or, Constantinople or whatever. What would that be called now? I forget the name of the city. But you've got a chance for people to not walk away from the faith having learned all I know in kindergarten or Awana or whatever by intriguing them with good, deep thinking that touches every part of the person. Like you said, your soul, your imagination, not just technically correct talks, which, again, I emphasize, we go to a Bible church, and they're big on the historical, grammatical method and preaching straight from the Word of God. And it's become a science, and that's just fantastic. Let's do it correctly. But if that's all there is, then that's compartmentalized. It doesn't touch the other parts of my life. It doesn't touch when I get entertained. It doesn't touch when I go outside. It doesn't, when I hunt or camp or, take a drive and notice other things. The arts, the movies that I listen to, the songs. What does that have to do with Christianity? Well, nothing much. Well, that's just not true. So we have an embarrassment of riches in our faith. Let's talk about them. Let's show them.
And Paul, that's why you wrote this book, isn't it? I mean, because you're really taking us through some other aspects. Of course, you talked about imagination, but there's also reason and conscience. How does that fit?
Yeah, that's good. So, the reason why I wrote this book because for 20 plus years working on a college campus as a campus minister now and then as a professor, how does the gospel get a fair hearing? But in many ways, I wrote it for my kids and my grandkids because, there's this real question. What is the state of the gospel in the next generation and the next two generations?
Right.
And so of course, reason for any cultural apologetic worth its salt, we have to give reasons for the faith because we believe it is true. And so, again, this is a trodden path, and rightly so, because Christianity is being attacked as unreasonable by many in culture, at least for the last 300 years. And so we have to give reasons, and that would be all the traditional, the evidence for the resurrection of Christ or the evidence that God exists and so on. And so that has to be part of any cultural apologetic. Right. The conscience is a little different. I mean, there's this interesting, Christians, and we should be passionate about justice. Let me tell you how I parse the longing for goodness, because I sub-parse it into three aspects that I think every human heart longs for when we talk about longing for goodness and this quest that the conscience has us on. The first part is that we long for justice, that we do long for a world made right, and we have the sense that something is just not right about the world. So we long for justice. Secondly, though, that we long to be whole. We don't want to be fragmented people, and of course, as one sociologist described our day and age, we're a series of warring fragments. But we don't want to live like that. We want our thinkings and our emotions and our willings all to be pointed in the same direction. I think that's a deep-seated longing of the human heart, and that's part of what it means to long for goodness. The third part is that we long for a life that matters. So we long for significance. And so we can use those three sub-longings to awaken, that everybody has, to begin these conversations in creative ways, so we can join with non-believers to do things that help meet needs in the world. We can do good art that evokes and awakes this longing for a life that matters, and so on. And of course, in the stories that we tell and the life that we live, we can seek wholeness in Christ, and that does matter, and that will hopefully awaken others to the longing for wholeness as well.
We talked about being a cultural apologist. Well, you know what we all can be, and let me boil it down. When I go to the YMCA, and it's mostly Hindus in my area, a lot of atheists and people who are just kind of nominal Christians. I can listen to someone tell something about, say, their girlfriend. My buddy James talks about that. And I can say, that really seems to matter to you a lot. And then he can expand on that. And then I can hear him out and say, and I've done this kind of thing, well, I wonder where that comes from, by the way. I I wonder why you feel that way. Is that something you think that was taught to you, or is that maybe something that's natural?
Yeah. So that's a great question for the cultural apologists. Is tell me about that. What is it about that you resonate with? That's the first step in awakening longing.
And that gets them talking about themselves, which everybody loves to do.
That's right.
By the way.
Just before we run out of time, let's talk about some of the resources that are available. First of all, I really do want to point people to Two Tasks Institute. Also, of course, we have a link to Paul Gould, and those are two places where you can find some of this information. But more importantly, you've got a study guide coming out. So this, I think, is just almost a turnkey operation, because with the book, with the DVD, and now with a study guide, you're really set up to begin to do this. And speak to this vision that you have, because I do believe that sometimes we don't know what to do with artistic people in the church. We don't know what to do with people that have imagination. And this is an opportunity to really begin to connect them back again to the gospel and connect them up to the church, don't you think?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in some ways, it's an all hands on deck project. You know, how for this generation and the next generation is the gospel going to be viewed as reasonable and desirable? So the two tasks that we're trying to address are very simple. You know, showing Christianity reasonable, and then showing Christianity desirable. And I mean, and the idea is that we're calling everybody in whatever sphere of influence they have, whether, you know, we're husbands and fathers, or doctors and lawyers, or artists and politicians, or educators, and so on. All of us can join together as the body of Christ to show the world, you know, the relevancy and the beauty of the gospel. So that's the vision of the Two Tasks Institute. It's really the heart behind this book, is that would God be gracious and start this movement where people would be convinced that, you know, the gospel story is the story that understands us, and it's the one true story of the world. And then would we locate our life in that world, and then in doing that, invite others to do the same.
So we don't have to be artsy in order to participate in this. And maybe it's the people who aren't who would benefit the most.
Yeah.
All of us.
And
yes.
be able to,
we need
to
each
share
other.
that. Yeah.
Well, and I'm going to give you an assignment. First of all, we're giving you a couple of links. And one thought that I have is that you can download actually the podcast right now that we've just done, or within about an hour or two, you can download the YouTube video of the two individuals here with me. And I would encourage you to send that to someone. Now, it could be the pastor in your church, maybe somebody that you know that maybe needs to hear some of these kinds of ideas, and take the time to pass it on to them. And most importantly, I think you really want to get a copy of the book. It is entitled, again, Cultural Apologetics, Renewing the Christian Voice, Conscience, and Imagination in a Disenchanted World. It is published by Zondervan. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore.
This may be why you want the book, so you can spend some time taking notes.
Yes.
Highlighting.
Yeah, you've marked up a lot of it here, and I'm going to do a lot more of it myself. And in addition to the book, there's, of course, also the DVD. So, again, take the time to find some of these resources. And if this is the first time you've heard on Cultural Apologetics, I got a feeling it won't be the last time. We'll get Paul back in here again, because we've got a lot more books that he is either writing or editing on that. We'll be right back.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Next hour, we're going to spend some time here looking at a number of different stories in the news. And if you'd like to join us, let's open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. One of the articles I've posted here is about the collapse of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And that is very significant, if for no other reason than one of the things that we are noticing is that it has certainly begun to fall apart, and it is one that has generated lots of articles in the last couple of days. So I want to address that real briefly, but not too long. Then I want to come back to the case of Jussie Smollett, because of all the reaction that has come down from both sides about the dismissal of his case. And, of course, you're familiar with the fact that he alleged that he was actually part of a hate crime, which looks like he actually orchestrated. Yet to this very day, there are a lot of people that tend to believe that, no, he's innocent. And there's even talk about his lawyers suing the Chicago Police Department. I'd love to see where that one goes. So these all sort of fit together into this idea of hate crimes and fake hate crimes and all of that. But then we want to move on to some other issues as well. One that I've been following, and I've been talking about more on the local hour, but it's something that has now become kind of national, is there was a decision by the city council in San Antonio to prevent Chick-fil-A from having their restaurant in the airport. Now, this is not the first time we've talked about something like this. About 4 years ago, there was an incident in the Denver airport where the city council said, you know what, we're not going to let Chick-fil-A in here because they're anti-LGBT, which is kind of ridiculous. But nevertheless, you know, that was the argument. And that didn't last very long, because some of the lawyers in Denver city council and part of the Denver administration there said, you're going to have a problem here. If you indeed prevent Chick-fil-A from being in the Denver airport, there will be a First Amendment lawsuit and you will lose. So they reluctantly backed down. So far, no word that the San Antonio City Council's backing down, but instead our good friends at First Liberty actually have sent a letter to the United States Secretary of Transportation, that would be Elaine Chao, wanting to investigate the City Council of San Antonio for religious discrimination. So I want to get to that a little bit later. And, of course, we've just had recently a vote on the Green New Deal in the Senate, and it went nowhere. 47 Republicans voted against it, I believe. A few voted present. Matter of fact, almost all the Democrats voted present. And I want to kind of tell you behind the scenes, apparently the former President Barack Obama sat down just the other day with many of the Democrat freshmen in the House of Representatives and said, you know what? I appreciate bold ideas, but you really got to start looking at some price tags here, because you're not doing yourself a favor. So I want to talk about that. And we also probably could get to this issue of health care. But since tomorrow we have Dr. Merrill Matthews in the studio, I thought we'll just wait when we have Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews here, since he's kind of an expert on that. As you may know, there are a number of states, including the state of Texas, led by the Attorney General Ken Paxton, bringing suits saying that the Obamacare or Affordable Care Act needs to end, because, after all, the whole Obamacare idea or Affordable Care Act was based upon this idea of an individual mandate. Since that has been eliminated, and since there's no what's called severability, I'll get to that probably more tomorrow, that is the end of the Affordable Care Act. And up until now, the administration and the Justice Department, some of those have backed up, but now they're sort of endorsing that idea. So that is something I will postpone till tomorrow. But let's just real quickly get to one of the articles I've posted. It's the second article by David French, and it's entitled, "The Southern Poverty Law Center is in a State of Moral Collapse." He says, "The longer you live, the more you see that a lack of integrity often has a viral effect on an organization. Once the compromises begin, they can't really tend to stop them." And so he goes on to talk about the fact that what used to be sort of an anti-Klan, Ku Klux Klan watchdog eventually began to just expand its definition of hate groups, because there really aren't that many groups that could even be considered hate groups. So then they start labeling groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom or the American Family Association, or how about the Family Research Council, which had consequences, because you might remember the man, he says, who tried to commit mass murder at the Family Research Council. He found his target through the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of alleged anti-gay groups. And, of course, you also have had other people labeled as extremists by them, like Charles Murray, who's a scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, who's been on the program with us. And the mob attacked him at Middlebury College because the Southern Poverty Law Center labeled him as a white nationalist, which is ludicrous. But nevertheless, when you start labeling groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom, which just won 2 Supreme Court cases as a hate group, you know you've just kind of lost any kind of perspective. And so in this article that is written by David French, he goes through some of those issues. And one of the things actually points out that many of these particular groups don't even deserve the moniker, which is certainly the case, but a lot of them aren't even groups. And that comes to a piece that Tim Wildman of the American Family Association mentioned. This actually is a piece written by a liberal who wrote it for Current Affairs, in which it says the Southern Poverty Law Center is everything that's wrong with liberalism. And this takes many pages to print out, by the way, but I love the lines here. Deploring bigotry while engaging in it, caring about equality except in the workplace. The so-called poverty palace really was full of all that kind of stuff. Being obscenely rich in a time of need, the kind of money that the Southern Poverty Law Center has put together, focusing on the wrong things. And that's where one of those pieces by David French is, because the article, which David French quotes, says, when you look at the hate map, you find something interesting. Most of the groups barely seem to exist at all. A Holocaust denial group in Kerrville, Texas, called CarolYeager.net, appears just to be a woman called Carolyn Yeager. A male supremacy group called Return of Kings is apparently just a blog by a pickup artist, and most recently was an announcement that they have been in indefinite hiatus. The link to Tony Alamo's Christian Ministries doesn't mean anything because he actually died in prison 2 years ago. And then you have a couple of others. You have an Atlanta group that's supposed to be a black nationalist group, which is actually an African fashion boutique. And Shark Hunters International is one guy who really likes U-boats and takes small groups of sad Nazis on tours to see ruins and relics. And the point he's making is that, you know, this argument that hate is increasing just isn't working. Most people just kind of have a live and let live kind of philosophy, and there just aren't that many hate groups. And yet, of course, the argument of the Southern Poverty Law Center is these are on the rise and you need to support us. And, of course, now you've started to see the whole institution collapse. First with, of course, the removal of Morris Dees on March 14th, one of the co-founders, and then more recently the resignation of some others, including, of course, Richard Cohen, who actually stepped down a little bit later. So that's what is happening to the Southern Poverty Law Center, an organization that has spent a lot of time labeling legitimate Christian groups as hate groups, which is it was certainly not accurate. But more importantly, sometimes even trying to gin up hate groups that frankly just simply don't exist. So that's the second article on the website. If you'd like to read it in its entirety, it's available on the website, pointofview.net. We have more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The democratically controlled House of Representatives just passed a signature piece of legislation, The bill clearly illustrates what the congressional leaders would like to do in America if they could control both the houses of Congress and the presidency. The editors of National Review call it a legislative buffet of bad ideas. The Institute for Free Speech calls it the For the Politicians Act. And the American Civil Liberties Union wrote a letter to the members of Congress urging them to vote no on the bill. When you have such diverse groups expressing their concern about the bill, you know it has many problems. For example, the bill would expand the requirements for financial disclosure. First, this is of concern as a time when citizens are being harassed and intimidated because they supported a marriage amendment on the ballot. Second, even the ACLU has expressed concern that a person could be exposed as a political donor if an organization chooses, without the donor's knowledge, to mention a politician by name. The bill would also revamp the Federal Elections Commission and virtually assure that it would come under partisan control. The bill strips from the states the ability to draw their own congressional districts, which are much more likely to understand the cultures and different priorities of the regions in their state. Critics also see much of the bill is designed to limit political speech. We have seen the desire of social media outlets and universities to control any speech that is unpopular or contradictory to political correctness. The bill attempts to micromanage speech into government-approved lanes. It is unlikely that a Republican-controlled Senate will approve this legislation, but the bill does show what Democrat leaders would want to implement if Democrats win control of Congress and the White House. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Love to get your comments about the situation with Jussie Smollett. A little bit of that was, of course, conversation yesterday when Nick Pitts was sitting in here with the Millennial Roundtable. But I wanted to come back to it for a couple of reasons. Number one, the fact is that over time, there have been individuals who might have been very supportive of him, who, because they were betrayed, have come after him in ways that, first of all, I think are appropriate, but second of all, a little bit surprising. In just a minute, I'm going to quote from Terry Moran, and I'm going to quote from some of the people in the Chicago Police Department. I'm going to quote from a few individuals that oftentimes are known for representing more kind of liberal perspectives, like David Axelrod and others, and there's just a great deal of frustration with him. And so that's point number one, about the fact that because there was a decision to not go ahead with the prosecution of Jussie Smollett, number one, I think we're going to have more of these fake hate crimes, not fewer. I have said before that one of the quickest ways to end some of the concerns we've expressed around this table, I have done numerous columns over the last 10 years about fake hate crimes. There's even a fake hate crime website just to document so many, is that the quickest way to actually make sure that those diminish is to have somebody pay a significant penalty for it. Nothing would have been better than a highly visible individual like Jussie Smollett paying the price. I've said the same thing about the problem that I think we do have with voter fraud, but since voter fraud penalties are so slight, and because most cities and states have so many other higher priorities, they don't really prosecute those individuals, they continue on. And so that is certainly the case. So one of those is, could we find at least a case where we would create some deterrence? Because if nothing else, I think the lesson some people learn from this is we could do it again. And the price you pay for even getting caught engaging in a fake hate crime is slim and none. The other issue is whether or not celebrities have some kind of privilege. You know, for years we've heard the phrase white privilege, and I don't deny that there has been white privilege sometimes. There's been good old boy privilege. There's been male privilege. But is there also maybe a celebrity privilege? Just taking some African-American celebrities, you can go back to O.J. Simpson. You can come more recently to some of the controversy about Michael Jackson. How about Bill Cosby and all the rest? Because, Jussie Smollett is well known, or at least began to be well known because of being on Empire. Has that been an issue as well? So I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. First article we posted there is by Guy Benson, in which he spent some time even addressing that issue of what is oftentimes called celebrity justice. And the first quote that he uses there is from Terry Moran at ABC News. I love Terry Moran says, and this is a tweet, Cook County's clerk's office tells ABC that they were shocked that no written motions were filed with the court in connection with today's surprising dismissal of this Smollett case. On top of that, the case has been wiped off their database as if it never existed. So it's, first of all, bad enough that the state attorney decided to drop all 16 felony charges against Jussie Smollett. But then, if that wasn't enough, they actually dropped it from the database, and then you had kind of almost like a victory dance, and now even the argument by Jussie Smollett's attorney that, because he was innocent, we're going to sue the Chicago Police Department. And, of course, the Chicago Police Department hasn't sat down, taken this, but instead has decided that they've now called for a federal investigation into what was done by the state attorney, Kim Foxx. And the spokesperson for the department even retweeted a Chicago Tribune story about the growing tensions between the police and the prosecutors. Here, for example, is one of the questions surfaced by the Chicago media, quote, Cook County State Attorney Kim Foxx, a self-styled reformer who gained office largely by riding the wave of justified outrage over Laquan McDonald's scandal, appears to have pretty much botched that task in her office's handling of this high-profile Jussie Smollett case. By first intervening with police on Smollett's behalf, and now allowing her top assistant to dismiss a 16-count felony indictment against the tall tale-telling Empire actor with the lightest of slaps on the wrist, Kim Foxx has endangered her political future and, more importantly, faith in the local justice system. It goes on to say that the office owes the public an explanation. That comes from the former Fox chief deputy, Eric Sussman, who told me in a phone interview late today, I agree with the mayor, it looks like a whitewash. By the way, the mayor, that's another one of those statements that kind of cracks you up here as well, because, again, the mayor is Mayor Rahm Emanuel, who, of course, has been so tied with the Obama administration. These are individuals that you think might have been defending Jussie Smollett, but they, I think, because maybe they got caught off guard or found themselves speaking out and then regretted what they had said, are perhaps coming with a greater vengeance than you might have imagined. Here's another report from Chicago, and then I want to move on to some others. Kim Foxx's office didn't merely drop all the charges against Jussie Smollett, but not long after Fox began playing Obama celebrity friends with former First Lady Michelle Obama's one-time chief of staff. Fox's office dropped the charges, yes, but also as part of the deal, he will be wiped clean. His lawyers want his record expunged. That would happen as soon as today, and so the stain of 16 counts in the indictment will be scrubbed right off him. You might say Fox is bathing him in the waters of the Chicago way, cleansing him, making him a new man out of him, and now he's smirking at the city, the mayor, the cops, and everyone. which, again, has not set well with a lot of individuals. So let me give you a few more quotes before we take a break, and then I'd love to get your comments. First of all, you have the police superintendent. That would be Eddie Johnson, stood by his investigators. You have Mayor Rahm Emanuel spoke out as well about this. But this, which I thought was kind of interesting, some of the comments by David Axelrod, who, again, has been an advisor to former President Barack Obama. He said, here's the lesson of this weird turn in the Smollett case. You can contrive a hate crime, make it national news, get caught, and if you're well-connected as a celebrity, get off for $10,000 and have your record expunged and files seized. The Chicago Sun-Times put it this way: it's an indefensible decision, a deal hashed out in secret with, this is outrageous, Smollett not even required to take ownership of the apparent hoax, not even required to apologize for allegedly exploiting hate crime laws, and not even required to reimburse Chicago taxpayers for the enormous cost of this investigation. They say Chicagoans and Americans, for that matter, will doubtless feel bamboozled by Fox's office and used by Smollett. One more, I'll take a break, and then I'll take some of your phone calls, because one of the other attorneys, a state attorney, is B. Joseph Maggots, who took over the case after Kim Foxx recused herself, in part to quell the uproar. But Maggots went on to explain that he opted for alternative prosecution largely because Smollett had no prior record and because of his community service with, are you ready, Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Push Coalition. Maggots also revealed that his office had dropped charges in other felony cases as well. And so, again, you can find some of these incredible quotes, but one more real quickly, since I mentioned Eddie Johnson. He is the Chicago police superintendent. I've been very impressed with how he's handled himself. And he was asked at one point, do I think justice was served? No. What do I think justice is? I think the city is still owed an apology. And let me digress for one moment. I've been a cop now for 31 years. And when I came on this job, I came on my honor, my integrity, my reputation. If someone accused me of doing anything that would circumvent that I would want my day in court, period, to clear my name. He says, I've heard what they've wanted their day in court with TV cameras so America could know the truth. But no, they chose to hide behind secrecy and broker a deal to circumvent the judicial system. My job as a police officer is to investigate an incident, gather the evidence, gather the facts, and present them to the state attorney. Of course, he did that, and it went nowhere. So, again, there may be some other circumstances. There may be something that didn't smell right or didn't seem right, or maybe they didn't think they could get a prosecution. But it is really amazing to me to see how a celebrity can pull off a hoax like this, not only not have to pay for it in any significant way, and then to actually have the record expunged as well. This, I'm afraid, is going to really make it easier for more hate crime and fake hate crimes to take place. What's your comments? 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking for just a few more minutes about the Jussie Smollett case, and I want to get into a couple of other issues. But again, it raises questions about, in this particular case, what Terry Moran at ABC News called celebrity justice. It's not the first time. I mean, how long did it take for individuals finally to say, there's something wrong with Bill Cosby, and nobody's taking action? The whole hashtag Me Too movement was due to the fact that in many cases, individuals that were high profile, they could have been news anchors, actors, or others, got away with a great deal. And this is certainly what it seems like has taken place in Chicago in Cook County. But the bigger issue, even than celebrity justice or the lack of justice for celebrities, is it possible that this is going to even make more hate crime hoaxes, I guess you could say, or phony hate crimes, or those kinds of things take place? So I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. Let's head to the state of Georgia first. Carolyn, thank you for joining us today.
Hi.
What's your point of view for us?
Well, I think it's prejudicial, period, because you have prejudicial people. You're not going to have a system that works because you have imperfect people, and everybody has their own prejudice. I mean, quite honestly, I don't know him. I don't know him as a celebrity, but we spend so much time on him. And when I consider that he didn't kill anybody, he didn't maim anybody, he lied, which is still against the law. But when I'm looking around, just even the people in Chicago, the police officers who have killed people, and you have video camera all around the country, and people have gotten off. And it's just kind of strange to me, whether he's a celebrity or just a man. I know you remember the gentleman, the youngster that had a DUI, and the judge said that he was just nobody had ever said no to him. He just let him go.
I know, for a while. Although then now he was brought back from Mexico. But again, I get your point. And see, that's the thing. I mean, I recognize that we have an imperfect system, but that's why I think we want to strive all the more to have a perfect system. And it does seem to me that the more high-profile case, you're right, there have been countless murders in Chicago, horrific things taking place on, maybe it's time for Cook County to focus on those attention issues, but just think of the amount of time and energy and resources spent by the office to investigate what turned out to be a hoax. And I'm just afraid we're going to get a whole series of other hoaxes that are going to just be easier to perpetrate because the consequences for a fake hate crime are nothing. And that certainly is the lesson that I think people are picking up here. But let's take some other phone calls. We'll stay in Georgia. And James, what would you like to add to our conversation today? James, do we have you? Well, we'll put James on hold, and we'll see if we can get to Colin in Missouri. Colin, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, I wanted to speak out against hate, and these are words from Pastor Arnold Murray, who was Marine under General MacArthur. And he said, you can't have a country, society, a family, anything with undisciplined hate. If you hate somebody on sight or just the sound of the word, you hate them, then that person owns you. Donald Trump's working for free, and the border's open because I think somebody hates him. If you don't have discipline on your spending, you won't have money. You can't have anything without discipline. And that's Pastor Arnold Murray's words, who's no longer with us and was a Marine under General MacArthur, had the largest independent ministry in the world. I am a reverend, but the country, we don't have a country anymore. It's so hateful that none of it makes any sense. And if it doesn't make any sense, it usually is not coming from the Lord. If you can't figure it out, that's why. It's not from the Lord what's going on here. And what they're doing to Donald Trump is all about hate. So the thing is he's doing it for free, and they're going to try and impeach him so they don't have to run against him. And so that's my opinion.
Well, again, let me just underscore what you just said. I've got a commentary coming out next week, and it comes from an article that appeared in the New York Times, which was also cited by some other people like David French, who's been on the program with us. It was called Lethal Mass Partisanship. And it is amazing because they found that just over 42% of each political party views the opposition as downright evil. Or, as the writer Thomas Edsel put it, that concludes that about 48 million voters, if you take those who cast ballots last time in 2016, believe members of the opposition party are in league with the devil. That's bad enough. But they also found that 18% of Democrats and about 13% of Republicans said violence would be justified if the other party won the election. So this idea of hate, yes, there are people that have hate, and it is surfacing in some pretty significant ways. And this is why I think it is so unfortunate that you've had the Southern Poverty Law Center labeling groups that aren't hate groups as hate groups. And you've had, in this case, a fake hate crime, which is not the only one, by the way. I mean, our listeners up in Michigan probably well aware of this transgender person whose house burned down with all the animals in it. And the transgender person was not only the victim, but turned out was also the arsonist, doing this to get attention to the transgender issue. So these things continue on, and it's not helpful for any kind of reasonable resolution of some of the conflict that exists out there. My commentary next week is on that partisan divide once again. But let's see if we can go back to the phones. I think I missed Georgia and James. James, are you with us now?
Well, actually, I'm in California.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes. My point of view, it does seem to be a very inconsistent decision, but also it brought to my mind the interesting way the legal system and so forth works, and I wondered if your show has legal experts that could comment on, when it's constitutional to call for a federal investigation, because I saw in the news both the FOP and President were calling for a federal investigation of this prosecutor's decision.
Yes.
And is a historical precedent.
And Chicago Police Office is calling for that. And we do have lawyers that join us on Friday from First Liberty. Matter of fact, I'm going to quote from First Liberty here in just a minute, and maybe they can speak to that. There's, I'm kind of back to even Carolyn's comment. At one point, I'm willing to let it go, but at the same time, maybe you don't let it go because these were felony charges. So in some respects, if it is a felony, then again, there could be a federal jurisdiction and federal investigation. So it's a good thing to check out, and we'll ask one of our lawyers that join us on the program every once in a while, see if they can give us some perspective on that.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. I'll look forward to that.
And appreciate you giving us a call in that regard. Since we're talking about some of our lawyer friends, I thought I would just give you a brief update on something which I thought was kind of interesting. Those of us that are in the state of Texas have been following the story, and I haven't really talked about it on the national program, but it has to do with the decision that came down, interestingly enough, from the San Antonio City Council, which banned Chick-fil-A from serving food at the San Antonio airport. Now, we have seen this before. If you actually get my commentary back in 2015, there was a big story at the time about how Chick-fil-A was not allowed at the Denver airport, and the argument was that they're not LGBT friendly. Well, the argument didn't go very far because one of the things that happened very quickly is the Denver attorneys in a closed-door meeting warned that barring a business on the basis of political prejudice would result in a First Amendment lawsuit that they would most likely lose. So as a result, Chick-fil-A, if you go to the Denver airport, actually has some of the longest lines of any restaurant in that terminal. Well, we now have the San Antonio City Council that has done the same thing, but they've added a few other factors. They said, first of all, we don't like the attitude that that Chick-fil-A has towards LGBT individuals. But I thought it was also interesting that they didn't like the fact that Chick-fil-A had given to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and the Salvation Army. What? But again, I love it. One of the councilmen says, well, everyone has a place here and everyone should feel welcome when they walk through the airport. And I love the representative from Chick-fil-A saying, you know what? Everyone is and should feel welcome at Chick-fil-A. We have a fundamental code of conduct at Chick-fil-A. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. They reminded everybody that they serve 140,000 people on a daily basis without regard to race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And so there is a bill in the Texas legislature called the Free to Believe Act. When we come back from the break, I want to talk about what has now come from our friends at First Liberty. They've actually sent a letter to the United States Secretary of Transportation, Elaine Chao, calling for an investigation of the City Council in San Antonio for religious discrimination. We'll come back and talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention one of the questions off air was, well, can you document some of those hate crimes? And as a matter of fact, yes, you can go to your website and type in fake hate crimes, and you will go to a website that has more than 350, including the two we've just been talking about, the Jesse Smollett one and the one out of Jackson, Michigan, of the transgender individual. Or you can go to our website, pointofview.net, since I about once a year write a story about some of the more recent fake hate crimes. And I typed in fake hate crimes, and there were about half a dozen of different stories over the last 10 years that, and each one of them had multiple stories within them. And so, again, that's some places where you can find some of that in case you're saying, well, you know, I need to read it for myself. go ahead. We've got a couple on our website, pointofview.net. And like I said, it is amazing to me, but there is actually a website which has the name Fake Hate Crimes. Let me type it in here again because it's really very easy to find. I guess it's called fakehatecrimes.org. And, of course, it has the Jesse Smollett one. It has the one about the LGBT activist or the transgender person burning the house down, as well as all sorts of others, including some of the more famous ones about the three women, African-American women at the University of Albany that claimed that they were abused on the bus. The only problem with that is there's a camera on the bus, and it showed that they were abusing somebody else. But that was released only after there had been a rally protesting all the ways in which these young women were being abused on the campus and all that kind of stuff. And turns out it was a total hoax. And there are lots of those stories because oftentimes there are activists that want to prove that we have a race society, a homophobic society, an Islamophobic society, whatever it might be. And so you can follow some of those stories, read them for yourself. And it is pretty good because that one website does usually provide some documentation, because you'll hear the story. Even when the Jesse Smollett one came out, I said, this one just does not pass the straight face test. MAGA hats and a rope and bleach. And when it's below zero temperature in Chicago, really? And that's exactly, of course, what we found. But let me come back to this real quickly because we're almost out of time, and we'll cover many of these other stories tomorrow here on the weekend edition. Penna Dexter will be with us, Dr. Merrill Matthews. We'll get into the issue of health care, because if indeed this lawsuit being brought by a number of the so-called red state attorney generals, which is now being countered by a counter defense by some of the attorney generals from some of the blue states about the future of the Affordable Care Act, is something that we want to get into in more detail, and we will do that with Dr. Merrill Matthews. But back to this issue of Chick-fil-A, because it relates a lot to what has happened to Jack Phillips in Colorado and others. And so as a result, a letter has been sent from First Liberty Institute to the United States Secretary of Transportation, Elaine Chao, calling for an investigation of the City Council of San Antonio for religious discrimination. The letter is written by Hiram Sasser, who's been on the program with us before, and he says federal taxpayers should not be required to subsidize religious bigotry. The City Council cannot operate in a way that brazenly violates the Constitution and federal law. But if it chooses to, then the federal government should pull its grant. And so that's kind of the argument being made. In its letter, First Liberty says, given that the blatantly discriminatory statements by the San Antonio City Council members against Chick-fil-A's religious beliefs culminated in a discriminatory exclusion of Chick-fil-A from participating in an airport concession contract at issue, the Department of Transportation and any other federal agency administering relevant grants ought to fully investigate whether federal grant money is funding violations of these or other provisions of federal law. And if you want to go to First Liberty's website, we can probably post this tomorrow. It's about 6 pages. First of all, they make a case for the fact that evidence for a pervasive, intentional religious discrimination by members of the City Council of San Antonio. Number 2, after about a page and a half of that, then it makes a case for the fact that the San Antonio City Council engaged in unconstitutional religious discrimination, making them ineligible for federal grants. That goes on for another page or so. And then finally, they have a whole section on the City of San Antonio's council members violated local and federal policies requiring non-discrimination. So there it is, and that letter has now made its way to the Secretary of Transportation. We'll see what the FAA has to do with it and the Department of Transportation, and we'll keep you posted. Just before we go, I wanted to tell you 2 inside stories because they never make it into the mainstream press. So you hear it here first. The first one comes from some people that actually were participating with something that was done by by former President Barack Obama, in which he was warning a group of freshman House Democrats that they should really pay attention to the cost of some of the proposals that they're putting forward and look at the price tags. According to people in the room, this is the best quote they could come up with, since I don't think we have anything on video. One of the people in the room said, that former President Barack Obama said that we as Democrats shouldn't be afraid of big, bold ideas, but also we need to think in the nitty-gritty about how those big, bold ideas will work and how you pay for them. And so one of the comments by Jim Garrity, who was reporting this, was, when President Barack Obama is warning you about spending too much, maybe it's time to sit down and take some notice. So that's one of the stories that maybe won't make its way into the mainstream press, but we wanted you to know about it. And in light of the vote that was taken in the Senate, which, of course, did not see the light of day on the Green New Deal, it shows that lots of these are just kind of message votes because they really don't think that they're going to pass, and they really haven't thought about the cost. But while we're talking about cost, what about the wall? Well, again, this one, I'll give credit to CNN, but again, you have to dig to find it. Turns out that a Pentagon budget reprogramming notification sent to Capitol Hill on Monday, which was obtained by CNN, indicates that up to $1 billion will go towards building 57 miles of fencing, improving roads, and other measures in the southern border. Turns out that the Department of Defense has authorized the Army Corps of Engineers to begin planning and construction of the project. The department will direct the funds towards these 18-foot-high fencing along the Yuma sections of the border and the El Paso sections of the border. And that's according to a letter from Acting Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan, which was sent to the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen. And so that's separate, by the way, from the wall funding in the last appropriations deal, which is separate from the replacement fencing that's already been put up. So you probably won't hear a lot about it unless you dig very carefully. But some of you that have said we need to build the wall, apparently another $1 billion is headed in that direction to build 57 miles of fencing, 18 feet high. And again, you may not have heard it. I will give credit where credit is due. CNN did mention it. And so you can dig and maybe find it there, but you probably won't hear it too many other places. But we wanted you to hear about it on Point of View. Well, tomorrow we've got a lot to cover. Matter of fact, some of the issues I intentionally did not cover today, like the future of this particular lawsuit brought by a number of attorney generals from a number of states. The lead attorney for that would be Ken Paxton, who's been on the program, who's the Attorney General of the state of Texas, could actually completely dismantle the Affordable Care Act. There are a lot of people that disagree with that, including some conservatives, so I really want to try to be fair about trying to look at that tomorrow and see what that might mean for health care for you, your family, and your friends. But that's all we have for today. If you find yourself saying, I'd like to read some of this, it is available on the website, pointofview.net, so go there and find those articles. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. Looking forward to our conversation tomorrow in our weekend edition right here on Point of View.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.